So the big question is, should you switch from a sporty tyre to a touring tyre like I did? Hello and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel. Now, if you've been a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know that as well as reviewing cars, I also like to review tyres, simply because they have such a profound effect on the way that a car drives, whether it's grip, traction, braking distance, aquaplaning resistance, noise levels, fuel efficiency, and even ride comfort. Each tyre performs differently, and therefore it's possible to choose a tyre that suits your own personal priorities. Let's take my Audi S4 TDI Avant for example. Being a sporty car, this left the Ingolstadt factory on Bridgestone's Potenza S001 tyres, which champion dry grip and steering response. But actually, my own personal taste prioritise aquaplaning resistance and low rolling resistance for better fuel efficiency, particularly on an all-wheel drive car like this one, where there's no shortage of grip in pretty much all conditions. And also this one's got the optional sport differential as well. So in today's video, we're going to swap the S001s for Bridgestone's new Turanza 6 touring tyre, which shares the S001's grade A rating for wet weather performance and their 71 decibel drive-by noise rating. But rolling resistance, fuel efficiency goes up from grade D of the S001s to grade B. So there should be significant savings in fuel with very few compromises elsewhere. But before we get the S001s off, I want to show you how they perform. But firstly, let's start by having a closer look at them, and I'll explain to you why this particular set needs to come off this car as soon as possible. Okay, so every S4 Avant TDI, whatever spec, comes with 19-inch wheels, and they all come with 255 3519 tyres. From the factory, at least the early cars all came on these Bridgestone Potenza S001s, and that's because Audi worked with Bridgestone to produce a version of this tyre that was approved for Audi, and that's signified by the AO marking there. That's not unusual. It's really common with Porsches, Mercedes, and lots of other brands. Aston Martin now, BMW as well. They all have their own flavours of tyre, Jaguar as well. So these front ones, they're not the originals, but they're exactly correct for this car. What I didn't realise until recently was these ones at the back are somewhat different. Now, they're both new pairs, front and back. So these are 22 manufacture. So they're under 2 years old, late 22, so they're quite fresh, and those are 23, so pretty much brand new. These ones, though, are wrong for this car, and even though they're Potenza S001s, they're in the correct size and rating of 96Y. The problem with these is that they say MO extended on them, and that means this tyre not only was tuned for Mercedes-Benz, but it's also extended running run flat. Now, it's not a run flat tyre, but it does give you a bit of time to get off the road to a safe place if you've got a puncture. Now, that means that the actual build of the tyre, the sidewall construction, and probably other factors as well, are different on this tyre compared to this one at the front. It wouldn't be such an issue if it was just a Mercedes approved tyre that didn't have any run flat qualities to it, but run flats are so different that I wouldn't say it's unsafe, but it may feel different on the road. Having a stiffer tyre on the back, it could cause more oversteer, for example, though these are inherently front heavy cars, so maybe not an issue on this car, but could be more of an issue on other cars. So yeah, they've got to come off. It's probably not even good for the all-wheel drive hardware to have such a difference front to back. But before we take them off, let me just take you for a drive in the S4, and I can demonstrate how these tyres perform, and then when we get the Turanza 6s on the car, we can compare with those. Okay, well, I'm going to try and be as scientific as possible testing tyres on the public road with all the variables that entails. Firstly, let's look at temperature, because that will affect the test. It's 18.5 degrees and it's not sunny, so the tarmac temperature will be pretty similar to the air temperature. It's the dry day. It's not a windy day, which will affect some of the tests, so that's good. So we'll try and replicate these conditions when we do the Turanza 6s. We're going to do 4 tests with each tyre. The first one we're going to do on the motorway, where we're going to measure the noise inside the cabin. We're also going to look at the fuel consumption between the junctions. And then on a country road, we're going to test the dry handling, and we're going to test the dry braking as well. So those 4 attributes, while not covering every facet of a tyre's performance, should help us appreciate if there's a difference that's tangible between the S001s and the Turanza 6s. So all we need to do now is get on the motorway. Okay, let's get on the motorway then. So it's important to try and be consistent. So I'm going to try and take out some of the variables from this as much as possible. For a start, we're going to get installed on the motorway at 60 before we start recording the fuel and the noise. So let's do that. That means I can accelerate safely now to get on the main carriageway without trying to set a speed now and then finding I'm alongside this coach, for example. So that'll do about 60. So let's get on and get up to 60. Okay, set the cruise at 60. Reduce the distance for the radar bit, lock it into 8th gear. And now at this phone box we can reset the MPG, that's good. Now let's have a look at noise. So from this Warwick Services sign, let's see how far we can get. Okay, so we got to the sign on the roadside there that said M40B 146.4, and it recorded an average of 75 decibels and 78 as a maximum. And we are going to record 48.2 miles per gallon right now for the fun bit, the country road test of the dry handling and the braking. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to a corner that I know really well. It's a 60-mile-an-hour road. It's a corner that can be taken quite easily at 60 miles an hour in most cars. So I'm not really pushing the boundaries of grip because that would be dangerous on the road. I'm just going to describe the, I guess, subjective feel of the car in that corner that I know really well. And then when we take one variable out of that and swap it for the Turanza 6, I can describe how that feels now. So we're in manual mode. I think we'll take it in 5th. And we'll get up to 60 miles an hour and then turn in. Get on the gas mid-corner then, it just felt so planted. Steering feel feels good, it wakes up, it doesn't feel like a sloppy sidewall. That's good. Then now let's roll into dry braking. Now we're going to stop at a telegraph pole from 60 right now. Okay, pre-sense did its job. We're just past this driveway on the right-hand side here. That's pretty impressive. I didn't really feel an awful lot of tyre movement with that brake, and the brakes on this car are amazing. I mean, if you've got bad tyres, you will feel them in that braking test because it just depends on the tyre working so well. Even with ABS, it didn't really feel like a massive ABS activation either. It just felt like it stopped. That's very, very impressive. Right, now let's go and get the Turanza 6s fitted. I love having the feel of the sidewalls while the tyres are off, because you can't obviously do it when the tyres are on, so they've been very helpful in giving me the two old tyres, the fronts and the backs, and the new Turanza for me to have a fondle with. So let's start off then with the MO extended. So my suspicion was the sidewall is stiffer, and the fitter here has said actually it does feel stiffer than the AO S001s. It's not a scientific test, but that's not yielding much at all. So if we go to the AO, which is this one, and I put my hand in like that, it's moving a little bit more. Now, another interesting comparison will be between the AO S001 and the Turanza 6. What we don't want is a sloppy tyre. I know I want efficiency and this and that, but I don't really want to lose too much in the way of steering feel. So let's just do that. And again, that does feel very similar to this S001 AO. So there shouldn't be too much of a loss of steering feel. And the fitter here has confirmed that that is how it feels when he's fitting the tyre to the wheel as well, that the sidewalls on these two are pretty similar. So that is a very good sign. Well, big thanks to the guys at Silverline ETB here in Warwick. I don't think I've been to a tyre centre for a very long time that uses hand tools to take the wheel nuts off and to put them back on the car. And they say they do that because it just means there's less risk of the wheel nuts being cross-threaded and that causes more problems. It takes longer, but in the longer term, it works better for them and for their customers. So there's going to be at least 100 miles to run them in, but I've got a big trip planned, which you'll probably see in another video. Join me again in probably around 1,000 miles when we'll compare them with the S001s that have just been taken off. Well, I've actually done 1,500 miles in about a month since the tyres were fitted, largely thanks to a road trip to Amsterdam. If you haven't seen that video yet, then do check it out. The tyres get mentioned a lot in that, but also it's kind of an interesting road trip that most people in the UK can do in a day. And yeah, it's a really brilliant city, always worth a visit. Today it's 17 degrees, so it's pretty close to what it was when I did the test on the S001s. It's cloudy, it's not windy, that's quite important. If you're a cyclist, you'll know how wind can affect your efficiency. So we're just heading up to the M40. We're going to try and replicate the test on the S001s to perfection so we can get the noise and the MPG, and then we're going to hit the country lane and do the dry handling and braking test. So let's get on the M40. Okay, here we go then. So let's get up to 60 miles an hour as quickly but safely as possible. We need to be in 8th gear for a level playing field, which means that's it. And get onto the carriageway. This Renault will let us. And then drop the speed to 60. And reset the MPG at this phone box. Which is here. And now onto the decibels at this service sign. Okay, that's the noise part of the test done, and we've got an average of 69, a peak of 78. That's pretty interesting. Okay, so we're on 48.5 now, still got a bit of a climb to go. The 1 mile marker board is coming up, and we're going to read the MPG at the half mile board. Slight bit of a climb now, 49.9, 49.7. And at the half marker board we're on 49.6. So it's better, to the tune of 1.4 mpg. That's about 3% better. But does it come at the cost of dry handling and dry braking? Well, let's find out. Let's head to that country lane and see how the Turanzas perform. Okay, so as we head up to that corner, I just want to talk about the noise on the Turanzas. I think they're a little bit quieter. We'll look at the data when we get back to base. But one thing I do want to point out is when you really load them up on a smooth surface, they can get really noisy. It almost sounds like the tyres squealing. I've had this before on some Michelins, not PS4s or anything sporty. It's not a problem during normal driving. It's very unusual to have the combination of circumstances where they make that noise. Anyway, back to this corner then, 60 miles an hour in subjective feel. They still feel pretty mighty to me, to be honest, not an awful lot of difference there. So let's get to the 60 mile an hour brake test from the third telegraph pole. 1, 2, 3. There's no one behind us. I would say that's close. Let's get back to base, crunch the numbers and see if there is a real discernible difference, good or bad, between the Turanza 6 and Bridgestone's S001. Okay, the numbers have now been crunched, and let's start then with dry handling and braking. Generally, there isn't much difference between the Potenza S001 and the Turanza 6, and what I did was a relatively extreme test compared to how people normally drive. You don't normally ram your brakes on from 60 miles an hour, and most people don't go around corners at 60 miles an hour. The ride quality, which I didn't actually mention in the test, feels pretty similar as well, and that's kind of reflected by how the sidewall stiffness felt similar when I was at the tyre centre. Noise, this is the good one. Now we need to ignore the maximum noise recorded because that could be like hitting a pothole or a cat's eye on the carriageway. What's more important is the average, and the S001 was 75 decibels average on our test versus 69 decibels for the Turanza 6, so quite a difference, and this isn't reflected by the tyre label where they've both got the same decibel rating, but that test only measures the noise on a drive-by basis from outside the car. It doesn't measure the interior noise, and that's far more important for us because we like the cabin to be quiet. Now on to the thorny subject of MPG. I think I've opened a bit of a can of worms here, but let's start off with the basics. We've gone from grade D to grade B on the EU tyre label for rolling resistance, and apparently that change equates to a saving of about a gallon every 1,500 miles, i.e. it's not really worth worrying too much about. Now on my test, the Turanza 6 was actually 1.4 miles per gallon better. It did 49.6 versus 48.2 of the S001, which means you'd actually have to do even more, 1,659 miles to save just 1 gallon. However, my test route actually underplays the efficiency of the Turanza 6, and that's because the test route from junction 13 to 12 of the M40 climbs overall 80 meters. So yes, we go down and we go up, but overall from the start to the finish we've climbed 80 meters. And since filming the S001s, I've realized the effect of rolling resistance on MPG needs to be tested on level ground, which is pretty much impossible, or you do it in both directions. So overall your test route has climbed not at all. And that's because the benefits of low rolling resistance are reduced when climbing and exaggerating when descending. Knowing this, I'd have happily have gone to the trouble of reshooting the test again, but by the time I realised the S001s were no longer on the car. Luckily, before I set off for Amsterdam in this car on the Turanza 6s, I made a note of its long-term MPG that was done completely on the S001s over 2,500 miles, and that was 40 MPG. Now, since then, I've done another 1,500 miles, all on the Turanza 6s, and the trip computer shows 46.5. Now, no, this is not a scientific test because it will vary based upon how you drive, the temperature, many other factors, but it's a pretty good indicator, and it reflects the fact that before I very rarely used to see over 45 MPG. I'm not sure I ever did, but now I see over 50 MPG on a regular basis, and I don't get that all the time, but it obviously helps keep the average up if you can go over 50. So for argument's sake, let's say the average MPG has gone from 40 to 45 MPG. This means you only need to do 360 miles to save a gallon of fuel, which equates to a saving at the current price of about £1.50 a litre of £380 over the 20,000 mile life of the tyres, which is the distance that Bridgestone guarantees. You might even get more than that, but we'll talk about that in a sec. So far, the Turanza 6 feels similar to the S001 in the dry, and the ride quality is unchanged. It's quieter, it's better on fuel. How much? Can't be too sure about, but it's definitely better. However, its main advantage is how it performs in the wet. Now, the EU tyre label confirms that the Turanza 6 shares the S001's grade A rating in the wet, but actually the EU tyre label test is only wet braking, so straight line braking distance in the wet. When it comes to aquaplaning resistance, wet grip, as well as wet braking, independent tests have proven it's actually best in its class. And this means a lot to me because most tyres can perform okay in the dry. Performing in the wet is much harder. Aquaplaning performance in particular is important to me because I've experienced it, and trust me, it's terrifying. And performance cars like the S4, which have a wide contact patch, it's a 255 tyre, which is pretty wide really, they're much more vulnerable to aquaplaning than cars with a narrower tyre that cut through water more easily. Then we have durability. Well, it's really hard for me in this kind of test to comment too much on that, and it does have a big effect on a tyre's overall value for money. And actually, I don't think it's considered that much when people buy tyres. It's not on the EU tyre label, so I don't know how people know how durable tyres are. But how does 20,000 miles on a set of tyres sound? Does that sound good? Well, Bridgestone have taken the unusual move of guaranteeing the Turanza 6 for 20,000 miles, subject to obviously some reasonable terms and conditions. And if they don't make that, they will give you an allowance towards your next tyre. This is based on a sliding scale. So if they don't make it to 5,000 miles, they'll give you a new set of tyres. Then if you get to just below 20,000 miles, they'll give you 10% towards your new tyres. The Turanza 6 is actually the only premium tyre to offer this, and it does kind of make it easier to, I guess, work out the value for money. It's also about £6 cheaper than the equivalent Potenza performance tyre, so there are savings to be had from the off. So the big question is, should you switch from a sporty tyre to a touring tyre like I did? Well, I guess for out and out performance cars like Audi RS models, Porsches, I'd say most definitely not. For cars like the Mark 8 Golf GTI Club Sport and Leon Cooper, which put around 300 horsepower just through the front tyres, I think I'd stick to a performance tyre too. Well, for cars like Audi TTs and hot hatches, but not the hottest hot hatches like most Golf GTIs, any Golf R, Audi S3, I'd say it depends on how you drive, but at 60 miles an hour, which is a speed limit for a decent country road here in the UK, I honestly doubt you'll be disappointed with the Turanza 6, but like me, you'll be over the moon when it comes to noise, MPG and wet weather performance. For the few non-performance cars that come with performance tyres, like the Mark 8 Golf Black Edition I reviewed a few months ago, which came on Bridgestone's S005, I definitely recommend moving to a touring tyre when the time comes. I hope that all makes sense, but yeah, it's been an interesting exercise. Hope you found it interesting as well. As ever, guys, thanks for watching this Volkswagen video. Keep subscribing, keep commenting, and I'll see you for the next one very soon.